Hey everyone, welcome back to the Krav Maga Worldwide Podcast. We're really excited to be back here today. We're trying out a new way of recording on Zoom. So if there's any technical difficulties, please bear with us as we work through this new way of doing things. But CJ, it's great to see you.
I'm glad to be here. I lost my voice, but I'm going to do my best here, Joel.
Awesome. Sounds great. We had a couple interesting topics come up, and I think the one that we wanted to explore today was the idea of, a teaching like certification process, or how instructors learn how to teach, and what that looks like in Krav Maga and Krav Maga Worldwide, versus our experience maybe in other martial arts as well. Does that sound good?
I like it. I think there's a lot to get into here.
Awesome. Well, first off, coming from a karate background and other martial arts and training in jiu-jitsu, I've gotten to experience a lot of different instructors, different methodologies, different teachings. And one of the things that I've appreciated most about my journey through Krav Maga is the attention to detail and learning like how to teach Krav.
Yeah, I would say that
in general.
My experience is similar in the sense that most teaching revolved around someone trying to explain what they were doing without a base set or a fundamental set of principles or even nomenclature they could utilize to better explain what they were trying to imbue to their students. And what it ended up being was a lot of repetition, which is not bad at all. But because Krav Maga is a system-first approach to martial arts or to self-defense, teaching becomes all that more important in the sense that an instructor has to understand the entire system and be able to reference within the system the movements they're making. That's part of the Krav Maga essential movements and Krav Maga essential drills that we're codifying now. But yeah, being an instructor is not easy.
Yeah, and it seems to me too like there's this. I know I've heard you reference it as almost like a master to student relationships that happens in the martial arts. And without a system or without a training or certification process, it seems like it's really easy for somebody to just be training in self-defense or martial arts for years. And then eventually they get to the point where maybe the instructor needs a day off or they're sick or, something happens. And it's like, oh, you're a high-ranking belt under me. Why don't you lead the class? And as long as the building doesn't burn down and they don't have too many complaints, now that person is just
the way
it's
been in a lot of traditional arts. I can't speak for every art, but that's been my experience. One of the things that we talk about in our school is the process of learning and becoming an instructor, to see it, feel it, do it, teach it. And a lot of times when advanced students get to the teach it part, even though they've been taught really a whole language around what we're doing, they struggle to put it together in a way that can efficiently and effectively communicate to students. And I think that's one of the things that's eye-opening for people, say, in our masterclass, is that they're very accomplished. They understand at a deep level everything that they're doing. And when they come up to teach it, sometimes the nomenclature escapes, and sometimes the moment itself can be a little bit overwhelming in terms of putting a teaching hat on as opposed to a student hat. And I would just say there are super talented martial artists in the world, super talented, that are can be lousy teachers. It's a different skill set.
Yeah, that was actually the question that was coming up while you were speaking was, just for reference point, I'm 5 or 6 years into running my school, and I have a brown belt instructor underneath me. And CJ, how many years have you been running your school now?
I think it's been 25. I've been involved with Krav Maga for 27 years and started teaching about a year into it.
And one of the most impressive things for me is the instructor cadre that you have underneath you, multiple third, second, first dan black belts who have come up through the system and have been around you. So, and the reason I say that is, do you think there is a distinct difference between somebody gaining a lot of skill at a martial art and being, very technical or proficient with it, and then also being able to transfer the knowledge. It doesn't mean just because they've been doing it for a long time that they could become a great instructor or that they are just a
It's
great
unusual.
instructor.
Most of the time, you'll get someone who's talented, and at least in our school, we have to teach them how to teach, which goes back to the worldwide Krav Maga Worldwide blueprint. Um, and some people are more natural at communicating. They're more affable. They're more able to connect with students than others on a personality level. But that alone is not enough. They have to have the blueprint to be able to showcase, highlight, and teach uh, techniques or defenses. And then they have to have the capacity to look at someone doing that exercise and assess whether or not they're doing it in an optimal way. And if not, what can the instructor do to help them to move in that direction? It's actually a big skill set.
Yeah, and I think that that's something important for, the wide variety of audience that we have. I'm sure we have students and instructors and school owners who are all listening to this. And one of the things that is important to me for students that are looking for schools is to make sure that instructors are doing ongoing training and learning how to become a teacher. Because otherwise, I think the transfer of knowledge of gaining the information can just take so much longer. And also, they're not getting the most relevant data or the things that are actually going to make them safe and the reason that they're
Yeah,
coming
I
there
would
and
say
looking
one of the
for it.
things that people probably don't realize that are coming into training as sort of a newbie, for lack of a better term, is that there is a huge difference between someone who's talented, someone who can communicate, and someone who can assess and prescribe and diagnose. And all those skills have to go into a high level instructor, something we've been working on for literally decades. And one of the things I do with my instructors is I look at their private training clients, and I'll look at them, say, 6 months after they started training. And my expectation is that they are markedly better at what they're training. And if they are, I take the instructor side and say, what's the problem? Because I want to make sure that the experience in the school is that there's this professional, talented, knowledgeable person that can communicate and diagnose and assess for me as a student of the school. I don't know if I addressed exactly what you're saying, Joel, but I wanted to say that out loud.
No, I think that's great. And yeah, I think it's something I've also heard you say recently too about just the experience that you're looking for your school or Krav Maga Houston to have in general. Like when someone comes in there, like I don't remember the words that you put for it, but if someone's coming and they're learning from your instructors, I think it was something like an
Yeah,
exceptional
we want an
experience, right?
exceptional experience. So there's, communities involved in that, support, communication, prescriptive, accessible fixes to problems with their techniques or defenses, ultimately techniques and defenses that they are seeing can work under the stress of like a stress drill. Um, I think one of the bigger issues that I run into as a meta issue or a mega issue is Pareto's rule probably applies here in the sense that 20% of the martial arts schools probably are producing 80% of the talent. It might even be 90-10. And I really feel, at least in my own experience, we've had talented people, physically talented people in our programs that just couldn't teach really worth a damn. And in trying to get them to understand the blueprint and the sort of the simple genius of the blueprint, and to help them to be able to identify and prescribe or diagnose something for a student it's just not their skill set. And they either have to stay with it long enough that it clicks, or more invariably what they do is they leave and they go and they try and open their own school. And what they're giving their students is so suboptimal because they can't teach, that it's a real irritant to me that people are out there holding themselves out as instructors because they've gone through some belt factory or gotten a certificate that says that they essentially didn't pass, but they have a certificate on the wall. And they're doing a very poor job of preparing people for what is probably the worst day of their life.
Yeah, I think that that is the underlying root of this topic for me too, and why it's important for instructors to be ongoing training and learning how to teach and sharpening that skill. Is that really what we do is meant to get people home safe to the people that they love and care about. And if they ever do face the worst day of their life, they're not going to rise to the level of their expectations. They're going to fall to the level of their training. So if someone needs to be with their instructor for 10, 15, 20 years to actually be able to defend themselves, I think there's something wrong in the system with how they're transferring
Yeah, I agree
that
100%.
knowledge.
I like to say, I think I've said it before, that you can explain a Krav Maga defense in a trifold pamphlet. It's not hard to understand, but the nuance and the meaning behind all the movements and the way they fit together and why they work and why they're arranged the way they are and what the principles are expressed in that defense, that explanation could take up all the pages of all the books of the Library of Congress. And that's what makes simple really elegant. And I think where people sometimes fall down in teaching is that they get the pamphlet, but they don't understand the underlying deep explanation for why things are like they are.
And I know for me, the further I've gone in the system too, because I remember being super excited after my first instructor certification, phase A, learning all the yellow belt curriculum and, feeling like I understood everything and knew everything there was to know about Krav Maga. And I think that that might be the case for some instructors out there, is that they've done one or two certifications. They're like, oh, okay, yep, this is simple. Like, I understand it. I got it. And that's where their training kind of ends. And for me, each milestone or mark or, testing or certification or seminar or anytime that I can get on the mat and train, it feels like it's opening more and more of those deep connections between why what we learn in the first levels apply later on
When
in
you
the
say
system.
something like why things apply later in the system, you're referring to a system first approach to self-defense, which is paramount. And when people don't fully understand that, you end up with things like hybrid Krav Maga or Krav Maga with this or that new technique thrown in there from a different discipline, like wrestling, for instance. And it literally escapes the person. And if people really understood, if instructors really understood deeply the whole system, how it fits together and why it fits together and why it is developed the way that it was, all this stuff goes away. It literally goes away. So the system first mentality is something that I don't think people really understand. And when they don't understand it, they don't embrace or engage with the system the way that they should. And as a result, they don't see the connections in the system. They can't teach to those connections. And they end up making modifications to things really that shouldn't be modified.
Yeah, and I think what I'm noticing, and this is just my interpretation of it. I'd love to hear what you think. I wonder if as time goes on, clearly Krav Maga needs to continue to adapt and add in new things for current threats that are going on in the world or things that we're seeing that are topical. And to your point, those things need to be upheld by the system and need to be run through the principles that we've been given in that work and that we know work. And do you think that these other ads and systems that are coming up, are people just adding in techniques because they want to appear different, that they're trying to tap into the excitement around wrestling and jiu-jitsu and MMA, and they want to try to stand out differently? Do you think that's what it is, or do they truly believe that these new additions are going to make their people safer?
I think almost all the above. I don't think that instructors often think about whether an addition to a defense or a subtraction addition would make someone safer, because they don't have the capacity to really even make that assessment. But they want to tap into excitement. They want to use something that they know. They want to be different. They want to show something, and they want to claim authorship, right? So sort of pride goeth before the fall. The problem is the people falling are the students. That's the biggest problem. And this is another example of system first mentality. the way that I try to explain to people in a way that is sort of accessible and not, an hour-long conversation is you have to develop your system around core principles that all sort of orbit each other. And the system has to fit together in a way where subtraction, sort of addition by subtraction. This is the perfect way of thinking about that phrase, addition by subtraction. You need to take out as much as you can and only leave the core movements that allow you to respond instinctively, that allow you to respond in a way that's thoughtful from a development perspective, not from a reaction perspective. And the system can't get big, it has to get smaller because of the realities around which people operate. When you're under stress, when you're tense, you're uncertain, things are rapidly evolving, and you're being, you're debilitated both mentally, physically, maybe emotionally. In that state, you need something that has been boiled down to what is most simple, most elegant, and most effective. And we have to have that for men and women, big and tall, short and small. And if you can't do that, you're missing the entire point. And people like to point out, like, the smallest person in my class couldn't do this. It's like, yeah, if you're teaching somebody who's 70 pounds, it's just going to be harder for them. I get that. That's the way it is. There's a difference between adding something to the system, which is, I think, a monumental mistake, and allowing a student to, because of something that's vastly different about their capacity to perform, let's say they're very, very small, allowing them to personalize their response. So that's different, right? For instance, if you're small and you can't reach with an elbow, you have to throw a punch or a palm heel strike. We didn't change the system. We just personalized that defense for somebody, as opposed to, what we should do is we should go 2-on-1 with a knife in someone's hand. It's like, no, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, I think, I'm around the 25-year mark of doing martial arts in general. And as a lifelong practitioner, even I sometimes want to learn new and exciting things. And for me, that's fun and that's cool. And it's because this is something I do for my livelihood. But I think the responsibility of when someone comes to us being like, hey, I only have 2 or 3 hours a week. The reality is I'm probably only going to train for 6 months to a year, is we have this limited amount of time to work with them and truly make them safer. And the more new, flashy, cool, exciting things that we try to add in and teach them, I think the less we actually impact them and the further we get away from their goal of becoming safer. And to your point too, a lot of the things that I'm seeing are wrestling and control type situations that, when I think about the biggest person in my class and the smallest person in my class, I just don't see those actually being able to work. It's almost like people adding those things or wanting to add those things aren't running through that principle of it. It needs to work for anybody with as little amount of training as possible.
I'm not saying that wrestling doesn't work. Wrestling's awesome. I used to have a poster in my room that said, "Winston, applying." I was doing, I think, a suplex. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I'm not saying that the things that people are adding to the system don't work for them, right? It might work for you, right? When I was, my fittest, and I was, 35, 40 years old, and training at 260 pounds with pretty darn fast hands, lots of things could work for me. I think the biggest lesson I've learned is it doesn't matter how big or fast or strong you are. Starting from a position of disadvantage and surprise is a tremendous burden that needs to be addressed. The other thing is this: there's always someone bigger, faster, and stronger. So always train like you're the smaller guy, you're the slower guy, you're the weaker guy or girl. And when you do that, it brings you right back to a system-first mentality. Krav Maga essential movements, being able to communicate to the student from that nomenclature, what movement you're making and why. Looking at a lot of people make those movements wrong, Joe. When we were at the summit, we were teaching 360. I was walking around saying, no, you haven't stacked the shoulder joint enough, so you don't have enough power to stop someone who's coming, overhead, with a knife or whatever else. You don't have the power, but let me show you how to align your structure so that you increase your capacity to defend by 2x. There's so much to know and learn inside this system that has at its core 40, 45 core movements. And rather than learning the intricacies and nuance of how to make a defense, and for instance, stack the shoulder on a 360, people go off and start adding stuff to the system that works for them, right? Notice when someone adds something to the system, they're typically athletic. So they're typically adding something that they can utilize. But they're getting away from, what can I give the average person in a finite amount of time, like you described, that could be effective for them. They're just missing the point. And it's crazy. People used to say, Krav Maga, it's like the super aggressive thing. And police can't train. It's like, no, Krav Maga is one of the simplest, most elegant self-defense or systems in the world, regardless of whether self-defense or something else. I think you reminded me that the teaching aspect of Krav Maga was largely influenced by Darren's mom, who was, I think, the headmaster at Heschel Day School in Los Angeles and spent her entire career in education. So even the legacy or the foundation of how we teach and why we teach the way we teach is derived from education. And when we move away from teaching people to what we can do or what we feel like is cool, we make huge mistakes. And it's incumbent upon us not to do that. People pay us to help them learn to be safe, and to perform under stress and in the face of violence. And when we forget that and we allow our ego or something else, some other motivation to drive us, we really do people a disservice.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this conversation is, we started out talking about why it's important for instructors to learn a method on how to teach and to continue to sharpen that saw and that skill and to continue to hone as an instructor. And then we got into this nuanced conversation about principles and system, which I think is only possible because of the amount of time that we've invested in learning how to be better teachers and how to be better instructors and getting that nuance. And I think, that's the underlying thing for me is keeping things as simple as possible, learning what's most effective, and then continuing to practice and hone that over time. I think that's really what's going to make people safer and make instructors better.
I would say for people who are listening and they're thinking about, well, how can I be a better instructor? My response is always start with the end in mind, and make sure that you're thinking about, as you teach, what the real goal is. When you have a new instructor, this goes for, I think, just about everybody. A new instructor wants to show everyone what they know. And that can be in some ways counterproductive because they're trying to establish themselves. And as they get more mature, they start to think about this idea that what they know has to show up in what the students are doing, which is a step in the right direction. Once you're in the system a lot and you realize the weight and the gravity of what is required of you to do your job well and what you're preparing your students for, the weight of that can hit you, and you can become sort of aware of the advocate that you have to be for your students. And as you think through the idea of advocacy and service, you begin to land on things like, I've got to make sure everything's accessible. I got to communicate clearly. I have to have a nomenclature that the students understand. I have to make sure that if people need a modification, I give it to them. It just can't be do it. It can't be make it work. There has to be another level of awareness and intention and focus that instructors bring to the mat to really serve students in a way that can be powerful for students.
Yeah, I think underlining that is really, really important because instructors, there's many instructors who work full-time jobs and careers, and this is their side thing that they do for passion. And then there's, a select few of people who are fortunate enough to be able to do this for a career. But as the career part takes over, there's running the business and marketing and all these other things. And it can get easy, I think, for any instructor to lose sight of like, why are we really here? What is the real purpose? And sticking to that to help drive our motivations around getting better as a practitioner, getting better as a teacher, to really serve the students and having that service mindset. Like that was really big for me, in what you just said. And another thing that kind of popped up as you were talking is in phase A, I was learning from Michael Margolin. And one of the things he said to me that has stuck with me ever since, that I think can be counterintuitive, because you said, a brand new instructor is usually like wanting to show them everything that they know to kind of establish that persona or position. But what Michael said was the best way to teach somebody nothing is to show them everything. That's another thing that happens when somebody doesn't have a method, is they get up in front of the class and they give a 15-20 minute monologue on a straight punch, and now there's only 40 minutes left of class.
Yeah,
and there's a lot more confusion.
I would say that I've been guilty of all these things throughout my teaching career. And one of the things that you and I have, I'm a little older than you, but we have the benefit of hindsight, and we have the benefit of developing instructors and seeing some of the things that they're going through and how they show up and what their motivations are. I'm not saying that people shouldn't go learn from a yellow belt or orange belt or a green belt that's been through the instructor phases. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that instructor has to take what they do so seriously and really understand that it's a profession, and really ground themselves around what their objective is. What's my job here? What's my number one objective in successfully completing my job? And sometimes what I'll say to people is use the acronym FIVER before you go teach. FIVER is what frequency are you on, what channel you're on, make sure you're on the right channel. It's intensity. How intense is that channel? Is it tuned to the right sort of intensity? Velocity. Are you popping between channels? Are you happy and mad? Is your head halfway in a conversation you just had, an argument you just had, a vendor you just talked to, and halfway in class? Make sure that your velocity is low and that you're on the same channel, and then be in a rhythm with your class. Frequency, intensity, velocity, and rhythm. And I think if people have tools like that allow them to bring an awareness to what they're taking into class, they'll be more effective at successfully meeting those objectives.
Yeah, I love Fiverr. Since you've shared that with me, I've been using it a lot on and off the mat. And something you said about the not learning from lower ranks. I think if somebody is passionate, grounded, service minded, and they're working their way through the system, and they're going through the certifications, they're training, that's actually a much better instructor to go through than the one who got their certification 10, 15 years ago. Maybe they're a black belt or whatever, but they're disengaged. They're there for them, and they're not continuing to surround themselves with like-minded people who want to grow. It
comes down to intention and mindset. And if your mindset is that your profession is you're a teacher, and your objective is to be the best teacher you can be, then you'll be engaging with the kind of content and activities and thought process that you need to constantly be better. The truth is, we were all yellow and orange and green belts at one time. And I feel like maybe there was some days where some of my best teaching came out there. It might not have been as deep, but the enthusiasm was there, and the advocacy was there. So again, I'm not saying don't learn from people who aren't black belts. That's not the case. It's really a function of intention to a large degree.
And I think that's also the beauty of the systems that have been developed, not only for executing and practicing Krav Maga, but for teaching, is, our instructors who come through our system, they don't have to wait 10, 15 years to become a black belt to learn how to teach, because things are organized and systemized. And once they learn that, and then once I learned that, I was like, wow, this methodology and what we have can be used to teach people anything. Like, I use it to teach my kids stuff. And, I've used it to help me learn other things by just following the formula and the the
Yeah,
secret sauce,
I
I would
think
say.
at this point, everybody that's listening has a good sense for what our attitudes are about teaching the system first mentality, why a blueprint is so important. Um, let's shift gears. I'm just going on the fly here. People don't know this is not scripted, and I throw wrenches in the works all the time. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about something different. What do you want to talk about, Joel? Oh, I put him on the spot.
I love when you throw the wrenches in, CJ. That's a great question. I mean, the other thing that's been floating around for me, and I know we've maybe touched on it before, but it's just really important, is the context between fighting and self-defense. So, for example, I was kind of telling you before we jumped on today that, we've had students before who are or maybe newer and just getting started, or we've even had comments and people online saying something like, "Oh, well, that technique would never work." And it seems to me that that idea originates from a sport or rule-based sense, or from people who train in competition type
Yeah, there's really
martial
three
arts.
martial sciences. There's traditional martial arts, which have their own value. There's fighting, which I really like, and there's self defense. Um, and most people, I think, understand, or I hope understand, that we use jujitsu. We just don't do jujitsu. We use fighting. We just don't, or we do fighting. We just don't use fighting. Meaning, there are elements of all those things that we do in Krav Maga because we are a system that just adapts those things that we think are most effective at keeping people safe. I would say the biggest thing people don't understand about self-defense is the OODA loop and the element of surprise. And what I mean by that is violence usually occurs by surprise. So you're reacting from a position of disadvantage. And whatever reaction you have, if you don't have a powerful reaction, you're going to get sort of eaten by the monster, for lack of a better word. Violence is going to find you and overtake you. But if you have a response, even if it's a suboptimal response initially, just because it's something that's not perfect, which is, you know, acceptable, if not almost predictable, if you can impact the OODA loop, things change dramatically, right? And a lot of people don't understand the idea, the principles of Krav Maga. This is probably a whole podcast in terms of the thinking and the depth and all this. But I would say that people that go online and say, "Oh, that would never work," really have no understanding of what's happening and why, right? Um, I really like, for instance, Thai boxing, and there's a lot of application um, in Thai boxing that we can use for striking in Krav Maga. I love the judo. I love wrestling. I really, really like and did jujitsu for years. And there are applications that we can use from those things. Um, so I even hesitate to engage with people like, "Oh, that would never work." So I know immediately they don't know what they're talking about, because unless they're saying you set yourself up to fail by virtue of your initial response, then they don't know what they're talking about. And what is the point in engaging with someone like that? I'll give you an example. If someone holds a gun to your chest or to your back, for that matter, and you do a defense, as long as your defense follows the principles, there's a probability that you're going to be successful. But if your first response is to put your hands up outside your body as a setup, well, we know that's probably not going to work, because the movement you make after that will highlight the movement in your silhouette. It will invoke peripheral vision. Peripheral vision will feed your brain faster. The gunman can react faster, so on and so forth. So there's a huge difference between saying something won't work because of the way you're setting up your defense, which you don't have the luxury of doing in self-defense, frankly, and saying, "Oh, the
Mm.
actual movements you're making won't work." That's pure ignorance. That's pure ignorance. It's akin to me saying, "Oh, well, my students ask me all the time, what would you do in this situation?" And I say, "I don't know." And like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Well, I haven't been in that situation. I know what to do, but I don't know what I would do." I can tell you what I think I would do, but to say with confidence what I would do is an ignorant statement that people make, that totally is void of the reality that there's stress and there's perception, distance, and things that make up a split second decision that you can't possibly calculate in a sort of a hypothetical. I ramble a minute. Now you say something.
I think there's a lot of gold there in what you were saying, CJ. And I think one of the things is when someone's fighting or doing a tournament or a competition or getting in the ring or the octagon or whatever, they've agreed to fight this other person. This other person knows that they're going to fight. They even have a rule set and, weight classes and all that sort of thing. And what you said in there is a lot of times we're already in self-defense reacting from a position of disadvantage. And the person attacking us likely isn't expecting us to fight back or expecting that person to fight back. So I think in that there is that element of surprise. There is that ability to respond and have a chance to fight
Yeah,
back and go
Amir,
home safe.
if people don't know, Amir Peretz, who's just a fantastic Krav Magaist. Um, Darren told me, don't say Kravist because there's lots of systems that start with the word Krav. But basically a great Krav Maga practitioner. Um, he often says that self-defense is about turning the tables. And he loved that saying, and I think he thought he coined it when he said it. He was explaining it to me as if I'd never heard it before. But just a super guy, trained Boss Rutan for one of his fights in the UFC for one of the championships. Super strong, super smart, super intuitive, a real service-minded guy, someone you can't help but like. And even his response to all this has been the difference between getting Boss Rutan or holding pass for Boss Rutan before a big fight and having a plan and having to access a plan under the stress of violence are two totally different things. And the one thing I think that most people don't understand is the most important thing to do in violence is respond quickly, right? To not allow the violence to infiltrate its intention, right? If I'm choking you, don't let them choke you too long. To respond quickly, to invoke, looking for the right word here, Joel, to make the person think outside of the intention that they came at you with, and then to work inside their OODA loop until the fight is resolved, until you've made the situation safe. There's nothing similar between self-defense and fighting. There's just not. No, you might use a punch from fighting, right? Or I don't know, an inside leg kick or an elbow or a knee. But that doesn't mean that you're fighting. You're still in self-defense mode. You're still reacting, and the goal is to stop reacting, to act, and then to get the attacker to stay in reaction mode.
Yeah, and I think most people might know what the OODA loop is, but just to underline it, it's observe, orient, decide, and act. How do you think the OODA loop differs or is the same between the context of fighting and self-defense? Because obviously it shows
Yeah,
up
I don't know.
both
I think
places.
fighting is a little different in the sense who you're fighting, where you're fighting, what the rules are, what their proclivities are. You use repetition to respond to some of the things that they do, so that you're using more of a tactile response. Like I feel his hook, so I'm responding with a counter, which might be like an uppercut or a straight punch. And so you're almost conditioning yourself to respond to things that are likely to happen. And you're in a position where you're waiting to sense those things are happening. Now, if you put someone on the rope, so to speak, and you start pummeling them and they're only in reaction mode, you're definitely inside their OODA loop. They can't respond in time. But the difference between turning the tables from a position disadvantage to working inside the loop is different than in a fight. In a fight, you're waiting for it, you're sensing it, you're looking for, a proclivity or something that they do to, launch a counter, or you're looking because they're not aggressive to be super aggressive and take the fight to them. So there's something built in there. When you're surprised, when things are tense, uncertain, rapidly evolving, and debilitating, it's totally different. And the system is built so that you can turn the tables. It's not something that you're looking to do or sensing to do. You're in reaction mode until you're in action mode, and you're putting them in reaction mode. One is way more difficult than the other, and that has to do more with self-defense than anything else.
And it seems to me like there might be more than two, but what was coming for me is there might be two camps of people. There's someone who is just really passionate about what they've invested in or what they believe, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, whatever their answer is to self-defense, and the, decades they may have put into it, or all the videos they may have watched online about it. So they're kind of stuck in like, this is what they believe about it. So those people, what I heard you say is like, it's not really even worth engaging with them. It's like, if that's what you believe, cool, awesome. And then there might be another group of people that are either just skeptical, or they just don't have enough knowledge yet. It hasn't been explained to them in a way. Like, how do we support those people in understanding why this is so valuable and why this is so important?
Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of little subsections of that. But the truth is, until you experience something, until you understand it in its full context, it's silly to say something won't work. It's just silly. And you would know that if you had been in martial arts or lived enough life in general, and you wouldn't say those things. But people are invested in what they do, and that's okay. But what happens is they're threatened by something that doesn't look like what they're doing. And instead of investigating with an open mind, without being threatened by it, they kind of go, oh, this won't work because it's not what I'm doing. And that's not a growth mindset, by the way. So that person's going to top out in what they're doing pretty quickly. Look, people get confused. They think, well, jiu-jitsu is the best. And I would say, if you knew who you were fighting, and you knew when you were fighting, and weapons weren't allowed, and it was just one person, like if you can create that, reality, there's a universe out there where that's the only way it happens, then jiu-jitsu is one of the first things I would say you should learn. For sure. Like, do jiu-jitsu and Thai boxing and call it a day. I've done jiu-jitsu. Yeah. I love it. I've done judo. I've wrestled a little bit. It's awesome. I've done gung fu, which was fun. I've done some silat. I've done a lot of blink to walk. I've done different forms of karate. And they all failed me when someone stuck a gun in my chest and said, give me your wallet. I was like, oh, I got nothing. And this reminds me of a story, Joel. When Amir was holding pads for Boss before his big UFC championship fight, they got done one day, and Boss is a big believer and proponent of Krav Maga. They got one day, and Amir said, let me show you something. He says, Boss says, okay, what? And he pulls out a training gun. He goes, what if I point this gun at you right now? What would you do? And Boss says, I'd knock you out, I'd punch you in the face. And Amir's like, yep, yeah, but hello, you're going to get shot doing that, right? And so Amir showed him a gun defense. He showed him why a gun defense works. He showed him why absolute time and relative time are different, and why you can get to the gun before the trigger can be pulled. And how to flip the script, how to work inside the OODA loop. He showed him these things, and Boss was like, wow, this makes a lot of sense. I think he's done some forewords for some of Darren's books. He's a big believer in Krav Maga self-defense. You have to make a distinction. And it goes back to the teaching thing, the teaching conversation we had. What is your objective? Right? If your objective is to fight in the UFC, don't do Krav Maga, right? Don't do that. Right? If you want to be GSP or name somebody else, Joe. John Jones or
John Jones.
Some of those guys. Krav Maga is not for you. If you want to be a UFC champion, don't darken our door. If you want to respond in the street, like, sort of a bad example, like Jason Bourne, that's what I tell people that come into the school, you got to do Krav Maga. The only thing that's similar about fighting and self-defense really is that they're both violent. And because they're both violent, we somehow confuse them. But they are as different as night and day. They really are.
I think that's a great summary, CJ, and probably a great place to end on. I really appreciate the conversation today, and I appreciate all those who've been listening and sending in feedback and questions, and can't wait to get together and do the next one.
I don't even know what I said today. I'm on the tail of sickness. I don't have my voice. So hopefully I said something that made sense. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Joel, and really appreciate people that take the time. This is an hour long. Take the time to sit down and listen to, us hash out whatever we're hashing out. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Krav Maga Worldwide Podcast. To access additional resources, read show transcripts, or to submit your questions and topic suggestions for future episodes, visit kravmaga.com/podcast.